extend a warm welcome to you, particularly those who are coming for the first time, and a special welcome, obviously, to our speakers. For those of you who are not familiar, there are restrooms on this floor through that door and also down below. For those of you who are familiar, they're out back. The main door is an open exit if you should need to go, and there's also an exit through this door and just down the first few steps. Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who hast committed to thy holy church the care and nurture of thy people, enlighten with thy wisdom those who teach and those who learn, that rejoicing in the knowledge of thy truth they may worship thee and serve thee from generation to generation through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Father Chris.
I'd like to introduce the first of our two speakers. Joe Rigney is an assistant professor of theology and Christian worldview at Bethlehem College and Seminary, and the author of Live Like a Narnian, Christian Discipleship in Lewis's Chronicles, which I believe he brought some copies of if you would be interested in purchasing one later. I first heard some of Joe's thoughts on Narnia on YouTube and ended up listening to it several times and sharing it with friends and family. I'm very excited to get him here today. I think you'll enjoy his insights into the rich world of Narnia and how spending some time there can make us better Christians.
Well, I suppose the real trick is if Father Paul's blessing actually gets the animals to bless us back, then it'll be a real festival of Narnia. And so I'm looking forward to maybe later if we can make that happen. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite authors and one of my favorite places to visit. And so maybe I'll begin this way. Actually, let me go this way. How many of you have read the Chronicles of Narnia? All seven? Raise your hand. Okay, good. How many of you have not read any of them? Okay, good. That's actually good. Okay, because that gives me how much explaining do I need to do? And so I'll do a little bit more then for those who haven't been familiar. But one of the things that I'd like to do, the fruits of this talk would be something like this. I want to persuade you, as a Christian, that you ought to make it your ambition to roam the Narnian countryside and swim in the Narnian seas and to breathe the Narnian air, all so that you might live as like a Narnian as you possibly can. That's what I want. I want you to leave here committed to living as much like a Narnian as you possibly can. And I want to argue that one of Lewis's goals in these books, and indeed what I think is God's goal in those 7 little books, is to shape us and mold us and instruct us in what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. And I, for my own part, believe that I'm a better husband, a better father, a better man, a better Christian, because of my hours and days spent inside the wardrobe. I think I really have. And there's some dark nights of my soul where I can point to and say, I met God in and through the bubbling, the imaginative bubbling that Lewis called Narnia. And I've grown in my love and affection for Jesus through breathing that Narnian air. And so that's what I'd like to persuade you, is that Narnian discipleship is Christian discipleship. And so to do that, I could say a bunch of stuff about discipleship and what that is, and what Lewis thought that was, and then about Lewis's view of fairy tales, and kind of go into some more exposition of that sort of thing. But I don't think that's near as fun as just showing you. So trying to, especially for those of you who've read them. So hopefully as you hear, the stories will come to your mind, and you'll think, yes, that's exactly what was happening to me as I was reading that. But let me say a little bit about Lewis's view of what stories can do to us. Lewis believed that there is a givenness to reality, that the world just is a certain way, whether you want it to be or not, and that the task of discipleship and the task of all education is to promote and provoke and evoke the responses to that reality that are called for. So when you encounter something pleasant, you respond with pleasure. When you encounter something ugly, you respond with recoil. Okay, that's the goal of education, is to help train you so that you respond to the world in an appropriate and fitting way. And because of our sin, we often have the opposite. Things that are ugly and false and bad and evil, we are drawn to, and we recoil from the good, the true, and the beautiful. And stories and fiction and fairy tales can help us to see ourselves and see our world in a new light. They can take us out of our own world for a few hours and then send us back into our world with a renewed commitment to those things that are true, good, and beautiful. And so the Narnian stories do this, I think, particularly well. They display through imaginative fiction and fairy tale the way the world really is. Here's what courage and bravery look like. See them. See what courage and bravery are. Here's what honesty and truth-telling is in all of its simplicity and profundity. Here's what treachery looks like in all of its ugliness. Here's the face of evil, here's the face of good. And if you live in the stories, and if you'll soak yourself and your imagination in them, and breathe the air of them, then you'll find, I think, that your mind and your heart will be transformed so that you come to reflect all that is true, good, and beautiful. This is what Aslan actually says to Lucy on one occasion. He says, "This was the very reason you were brought into Narnia." And you ought to hear that as Lewis, the author, talking to you. Why was I brought into Narnia? That by knowing me here for a little, you might know me better there. So the whole point is that you go in so that you come out different, changed, transformed. And so how does it do this? Well, I'm going to highlight a couple of ways that Lewis does this shaping work through these stories. First, he shapes us through his vivid and concrete descriptions. And what I mean by this is that Lewis is an amateur philosopher, an Oxford professor. If he wanted to, say, give you a cogent, philosophically precise definition of evil, he could do that. He could probably give you a really great, drawn from classical sources and Augustine and Aquinas, and tell you what the definition of evil is. Or he could show you. He could imaginatively display what evil really looks like. He could show you, say, a white witch who makes it so that it's always winter, never Christmas. Always frosty, never festive. Always Minnesota, always February. Right? He can show you what evil is by showing you this witch who's in love with icy death and is at war with all things joyful and glad. And so you see this picture. She makes it always winter, never Christmas. That's kind of what evil is like. Tell me more, Lewis. What else is evil like? Well, evil will offer you enchanted food, the kind that will eventually kill you because you gorge yourself on it. Evil, icy death will then, when it encounters true festivity, there's a scene in the first book where the White Witch comes upon this Christmas party, right? With, plum pudding and toasts, and it's this rousing good time. And so here, she's just offered enchanted candy, and now she comes across true festivity, and what does she do? She says, what is the meaning of all of this gluttony, this waste, this self-indulgence? And if you see what Lewis just did there, is he showed you that underneath sinful indulgence and gluttony, and underneath sinful asceticism and rejection of good things, is the same icy death. It's the same evil. Evil wants to either gorge, to inordinately pursue things, to gorge ourselves on enchanted candy, or evil wants to cut us off from all true festivity and joyfulness and gladness of heart. Evil does both of those things, and here we see. And in a way that if he just said that in a sentence, we might have said, oh, that's interesting. I think that's true, right? Evil is both indulgent and ascetic. Great, thanks. But by showing it as in the story, it has an effect on us. And so much so that when we encounter those same dispositions and attitudes and actions in our lives, now we're prepared to say no. Right? No to the indulgence, no to the gluttony, and no to the asceticism, yes to the festivity. So this is what Lewis does with evil. He also does the same thing with good. I don't know if you've had this experience, and if those of you who read the books, I often find that I get about 10 pages in and I get hungry. Usually because of Lewis's description of some mealtime or other. He starts describing, fresh fish and buttered potatoes and marmalade rolls, and I start saying, I think I need to put the book down and go have a sandwich. And there's something really powerful about this. And it's not just the food itself, it's the atmosphere. Right? I want to be at that dinner party. If I could have a meal in the beaver's house, sitting around, just this nice simple meal, fresh fish just caught with the marmalade rolls and Mr. Beaver, they're all having, I think, water and tea or something, and Mr. Beaver's got a nice mug of beer. And I think, boy, wouldn't it be great to have a nice mug of beer with a beaver? And so why? What's happening to us in this moment? Well, he's painting a picture of what joyfulness, gladness, jollification is like, and then trying to draw us in so that we want to be there, and even more importantly, that we want to try to recreate that kind of atmosphere in our own homes, in our own dinner tables, that we want to have family dinners like the Beavers with a busy kitchen and good food served hot, laughter, stories, raised hopes, because Aslan is on the move. It might actually end someday. The winter might actually be broken. And so Lewis is a master of painting these scenes, painting these pictures for us of what evil is, of what good is, of what celebration is, in such a way that we want to go in. If we could get in there, we would love it. But even more importantly, that we try to recreate that in our own lives. Second way that these stories shape us. I could say something a minute. I'll flag this and say, if you want to follow up, you can pick up a copy of the book in the back. One of the things that Lewis does so well is he embeds his apologetic works in the books. So one of my favorite things, I have a chapter on this, one of the favorite things in the books is that Lewis picks a fight with Sigmund Freud. Okay? There's nothing like picking a fight with Sigmund Freud in a children's book. I say, if you're going to do it, that's the place to do it. But, so I won't go into the detail, but here's the basic idea. How many of you ever heard this kind of argument that belief in God is sort of an infantile projection of your own need for a father? Right? So the reason you believe in God is because when you're a kid, you have a dad or a mom who watches over you, protects you, provides for you, all of that. And then you grow up and you realize they're not as big and strong as you thought when you were a little kid, and you still have this psychological need. And so you just project your father into the sky and call it God our Father. Right? That's the argument. That's the explanation that the unbelieving world wants to give for faith in God. Well, Lewis is aware of this. It's very Freudian, and Ludwig Feuerbach and some of these other German atheists. And Lewis embeds that kind of argument in the silver chair and shows us how you can resist it so that children or adults who are shaped in that way grow up, and when they encounter that same kind of argument in the real world, they're prepared. Because Lewis thought that that kind of story, that kind of explanation for belief in God was a kind of bad magic. It was an enchantment. Freud was weaving a spell and pulling the wool over your eyes so that you begin to fall asleep and begin to say, there's no other world, this is all there is, there's no God above, there's no heaven, there's no hell, it's just this bleak world. And the whole point was, what's the counterspell? Right? What kind of magic can break that enchantment? And Lewis shows that. So if you want to follow up on that, pick up a copy. But what I want to talk about is trajectories. Lewis shapes us by helping us pay attention to our trajectories. So most people who are familiar with Narnia know the first book pretty well. And Edmund is this really interesting character. Edmund is this beastly little boy. That's when we first meet him. He's just a little rotten snot. He's spiteful. He disrespects his siblings. He's complaining and murmuring all the livelong day. Anyone who's smaller than himself, he picks on them and teases them, including his sister. He teases her because he thinks she's made up this imaginary world. He follows her in, thinking, I'm going to tease her some more. And he winds up in Narnia. And he realizes he was wrong. And so what does he say? Well, I'll say I'm sorry if you like. It's like, oh, the sincerity is so heartwarming. And then when she doesn't come out because she's off finding the fawn, he says, oh, just like a girl, sulking somewhere and won't accept an apology. Well, when you offer it so genuinely, how could you resist such an apology? So he's this rotten kid. And one of the things that Lewis is doing with Edmund is showing that our direction determines our destination. Our direction determines our destination. We are, if you think of us as we're embodied creatures, well, we're also in-story creatures. We live in a narrative. We have a story to our lives. And we have directions and trends and trajectories. And Lewis is mindful of the fact that our trajectories are governed by an author who's not mocked, who tells us you will reap what you sow. So Lewis shows us sin in kind of this seed form, like this beastly little boy. It's little kid sin. This isn't grandiose white witch sin, right? This isn't world-ending, nuclear bomb dropping kind of sin, but this is sin in seed form. And what he wants to show us is watch it grow. Watch the sin go from seed to bud to full flower, and you wind up with Edmund trudging through the snow, just eaten up by hate and anger and bitterness, talking about how I can't wait to get rid of those beavers, when the beavers had shown him nothing but kindness. They had done nothing to him cruelly, and he is just eaten up, and he's going to get back at his brother because, this is all Peter's fault. And so the point is, so here's the lesson you take from that. Sometimes you can read the Narnian stories and you think, boy, wouldn't it be great if I got in? But what Edmund shows us is, what would happen if we got into Narnia? Given the trajectory of our lives right now, what would happen if you got in? We think, maybe I'll meet a fawn. I'll meet this friendly fawn who'll be my best friend for life. Or I'll meet some friendly beavers who will invite me for dinner. Maybe I'll meet them. Or, what if because of the kind of person you are out here, you got in and you met a white witch who offers you enchanted candy, which you eat and gobble and become enslaved? What if that was the direction your story was taking? And so, if we got into Narnia and met the white witch and were lured onto her side, what then happens when we hear Aslan's name for the first time? One of those beautiful scenes where, Beaver says, Aslan is on the move. And Peter, when he hears the name Aslan, right, who's the Christ character in the story, he has this moment of bravery and courage. He wants to go run into a battle. And Susan feels like this delicious smell just kind of wafted through, like cookies, right? So she's just, it's beautiful. That name kind of called something out of her. And Lucy thinks it's the first day of summer vacation. The holidays are here and it's time for birds chirping in the backyard. Adventures are calling. They both lean in. Edmund, because he's already half on the side of the white witch, recoils in horror. He falls back. What if we're the type of people who, if we heard the name of Aslan, that's our reaction? Lewis at least invites us to ask that question. What kind of people are we becoming? We are always sowing the seeds of our future selves. We are always sowing the seeds of our future selves. We are embarked. We're heading in a particular direction, and sooner or later, we're bound to end up there. And Edmund reminds us that we might not like the destination at the end of our road. When it comes time for us to reap, we might find ourselves tied to a tree, as he is, eventually. Tied to a tree with a dagger at his neck, because he has been enslaved by the white witch. But, of course, here's the true import of the story, right? Edmund's story isn't a tragedy. It doesn't end in death. There is a reaping, right? Reaping always follows sowing. That's the principle. That's the biblical principle. That's the principle here. But in this case, if you know the story, Aslan reaps what Edmund has sown. Just like Christ reaps all that we have sown, all of the evil that we've sown in our lives, tossed onto Jesus and borne away. All of Edmund's beastliness thrown onto Aslan, the lion carries it away at his death. This is the magic, this is a deep magic of substitution, right? Of the sinless one for the sinner. This is a magic. How can this be? How is this possible? It's a kind of white magic, beautiful magic, deep magic. And it turns beastly little boys into wise kings. And it changes our stories forever. Maybe one or two more here. Narnia, how else does Narnia shape us? Narnia shapes us by showing us the peculiar glories of manhood and womanhood. This is one of my favorite things about the stories. Lewis loved the differences between men and women. He loved that men were men and not women, and that women were women and not men. Our culture hates this. It hates the fact that men and women are different and have distinctive and peculiar glories. Both glorious, but different. Lewis loved it, and he would have, I think, agreed with G.K. Chesterton in one of my favorite little poems. If I set the sun beside the moon, and if I set the land beside the sea, and if I set the town beside the country, and if I set the man beside the woman, I suppose some fool would talk about one being better. Which is better? Is the sun or the moon better? Is the town or the country better? Is the man or the woman better? What a foolish question. What a foolish question. They're different. They're not the same. But not better and worse. Different and gloriously so. And Lewis loves those glorious distinctions. And I wrote a whole chapter in there on the glory of Narnian queens. because of their intuition, because of the way that they can see things. Lucy knows Aslan the best of all the characters in the story. I think she's Lewis's favorite character in the books. She gets his moods, they say at one point. Lucy understands some of his moods. And wouldn't it be a great thing to understand some of God's moods? Right? To get him at an intuitive level. Or you think about the friendship that you see between Polly and Diggory in some of the later books, or Erebus, who would never abandon a friend. So there's these beautiful pictures of feminine strength and beauty and grace, and I wrote a whole chapter on that. But what I'd like to talk about, because I have 2 little boys, and so this is where my mind goes often, is Narnian kingship. And to do so, I want to mention King Lune. King Lune is my favorite character in all of the books. Okay? And he's this minor character, right? Some of you may be going, I don't even know that there was a King Lune. King Lune shows up for a handful of scenes in the last third of one book, and he just blows all the other characters in my mind. And there's reasons. I think I'm related to him. They do describe him as a jolly fat king, so I can't prove it, and people question it, but I'm fairly sure that there is a blood connection in some way. And so, why do I love him? Because Lewis knows that we're going to imitate those that we admire, right? Children imitate their parents or their siblings. Students imitate their teachers. Athletes imitate their heroes. And readers imitate their favorite characters. Right? Your stories are shaped by those characters you identify with, and Lune is that way for me. So let me give you some reasons. First, he's a man under authority. There's a line that he says, where he says, the king is under the law because it's the law that makes him king. Lune knows he's not God. He's not the boss. He's a man under authority, and he embraces that authority and serves his people out of that authority. He models great courtesy. He bows very low whenever he first meets a young woman named Erebus. And at the same time, he's not sort of this only that exists in the court. We find him at one point having just cleaned his dog kennels. Right? He's a king, and yet there he is getting his hands dirty, cleaning his own dog kennels, because he's not above that. What a beautiful picture of a king who can bow in a very courtly manner and yet get his hands dirty. He's thick-skinned and stable. At one point, he's insulted by a foreign king, a foreign prince. And all of the other men at the court jump up in anger. And Lune rebukes them all and says, sit down, don't be provoked by the taunt of a payjock. And I always remember reading that and thinking, I have no idea what a payjock is, but I will not be provoked by its taunts. I had to look it up. It's actually a male peacock. So you can now go impress all of your friends that you know what a payjock is. But don't be provoked by its taunts. So he's thick-skinned, right? So here he's just been insulted. He's the king, and you expect him to bow up, right? Imagine how most of our politicians would respond if they were insulted publicly. And here he says, don't be provoked by him. Be above that. He's also a great warrior. He fights a battle and defeats a famous warrior in hand-to-hand combat. He's a wonderful father. This is where he really shines for me. He delights in his boys. He shows them great tenderness and affection. Whenever he sees them, his face lights up. The book says he has a twinkle in his eye. He gives them big bear hugs, and yet he still provides them with discipline. At one point, one of his sons taunts the prince when this evil prince has been hung on a wall. He got caught on his jacket, got caught on a wall, and he's hanging there, and flailing wildly. And one of his sons mocks him, and the king says, "No, stay, Corin. Never taunt a man." Except when he's stronger than you. Then, as you please. Right? So there's a principle here. You don't taunt anybody who's not stronger than you. David can taunt Goliath. If you're Elijah and you're surrounded by 400 prophets of Baal, let them have it. Got them right where we want them. And then finally, Lune has suffered a lot. Okay, he lost his wife in childbirth. Giving birth to their twin sons. He thought for most of their lives that he had lost one of his sons in a shipping accident, so he thought one of his sons was dead. So he's experienced this great loss, but it didn't cripple him. He's still joyful. He's still jovial. He's still kind and wise and judicious. And then he utters the line that I think is my favorite in all the stories, and it bears fruit every day in my engagement with my 2 young sons. He says this is what it means to be a king. To be first in every desperate attack, and last in every desperate retreat. And when there's hunger in the land, as must be now and then in bad years, to wear finer clothes and laugh louder at a scantier meal than any man in your land. What does it mean to be a king? And then I'm going to ask, what does it mean to be a man? Here's what it means. First in, last out, laughing loudest. That's masculinity. That's what masculinity ought to be. It ought to be sacrificial. It means if there's a bullet to be taken, I'm going to take it. If there's a sacrifice to be made, I will make it first. I may not be the only one to sacrifice in my family. My wife has made plenty of sacrifices in the 8 years we've been married. But I want to be first. I want to die. That's the privilege. I get to have the privilege of dying first and showing the way. And then if there's danger to be had, I want to be the last one out. Everybody else gets to safety. I will remain behind. That's what it takes. And the whole time, I'm not doing it with a scowl on my face, or grumpy, or complaining, or murmuring, but laughing the loudest. What a privilege it is to sacrifice and to lay down one's life for another. And so that's what I say. Every night when I put my boys to bed, I pray a blessing over them. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And you kind of give a standard ironic sort of deal. And then I just start going wherever I want. And usually it winds up here. And may the Lord grow you up to be true men of God. And then they will say, and then we'll usually do call and response. First, in, last, out, laughing, loudest! And then we have a big chuckle all together as a family. So this is what it means. That's what it means to be a man. So that's very powerful. That one line, when I'm talking to college students and they're trying to, college men are trying to figure out what in the world are they supposed to do and be. And I just want to say, here's what you need to do. You need to find where can you be the first in, the last out, and laughing the loudest. That's what you ought to be looking for. Look for those opportunities and press into them. Finally, I'll close with this. Narnia brings us face to face with Aslan. Okay, that's the main import. Underneath the manhood, womanhood stuff, underneath the trajectory stuff, underneath the meal times and the resistance of evil, there is this encounter with Aslan. So let me illustrate with a couple of stories, which you may or may not be familiar with if you've not read the later books. Shasta and Diggory. Shasta is this orphan boy who shows up in the book, The Horse and His Boy. He's an orphan. He was raised by an abusive stepfather who treats him like a slave. He has no friends, never has had any friends, no companionship, just a lonely life with no hope for the future. In the story, he finally escapes to the north with a horse. And his journey is filled with danger. He's chased by roaring lions. There's this ever-present threat that he could be captured and executed as a horse thief. He gets separated from his friends that he's traveling with on the way. There's a fearful night he spends at some tombs. He has to spend the night at these tombs. And there's howling jackals who are all around him. And every glimmer of hope, he seems to be disappointed. Every time anything good happens, it's immediately followed by bad. He's taken in at one point by the Narnians. Right? There's this brief moment where he gets welcomed in because they mistake him for someone else. And then he gets forced to leave when he's mistaken. The guy he's mistaken for returns. He's kicked back out. At one point, he's running, trying to get a message to the king. And he arrives at the hermit's house, this hermit. And all of them are exhausted. And the hermit looks at him and says, he finally thinks, we made it. And he says, no, you don't. Run. Keep going. You're not done yet. And so there's no time to wait. He has to run. And when he finally meets King Loon and gives him the message, they're about to attack your castle. Hurry back to your castle. And so they start riding back, and he doesn't know how to ride a horse. And so he gets sort of left behind and lost. And then we find him kind of journeying through a mountain pass at night, all alone on a horse. Starving, hasn't eaten anything in days. Tired, he's just overwhelmed by everything goes bad for me. My whole life, everything has just been bad. And then all of a sudden, he feels something walking next to him, breathing heavily, which, as you can imagine, freaks him out. And he's filled with terror. And in the dark, this tired, scared, frightened little boy says, Who are you? Okay, so just pause, Shasta, we'll come back to him. Diggory, when we first meet him, he's been crying because his dad's in India, far away, he's in England, his dad's in India. He's living with his crazy uncle, who is crazy. And most of all, because his mother is dying.